By the end of this video, you're going to learn exactly how to build a debate-ready argument in just 4 simple steps. But before we get into exactly how you can build these debate-ready arguments, let's first talk about why your current arguments as a beginner are failing. Beginner arguments typically fail for one of 3 reasons. Sometimes an argument made by a beginner is just a claim without any warranting or any evidence to back it up. It's simply just a statement they made without any proof or any logic behind it. Another very common mistake that I see beginners make all the time is that they just drop a statistic, or they just drop evidence or a number or some piece of evidence that has nothing to do with the actual topic or is completely unexplained and unwarranted throughout the entire debate. But one of the most common mistakes is actually quite simple. People make arguments that try to prove a point, but they don't connect those points back to the bigger picture of the entire debate. And that's where they lose, because even though they were right about a certain argument, they never connected it back to the bigger picture, which is why in the end they lost the entirety of the debate. Though thankfully, these beginner mistakes are easy to correct, and it's all thanks to the Peel method. Let's go through it one by one. The first letter in Peel is P, which stands for point. Your point is your claim, and it's really just what you're arguing for or against. And so it's important that you make sure that it's clear and concise in a single sentence. Though it's also important to make sure that your claim is completely debatable, so that way you're actually able to argue with it. You can't just state a fact like grass is green or oranges are orange, because then that wouldn't be something that you could debate. Yes, it may be true, and it may be very convincing because it is true, but that doesn't mean that it's an actual argument that you could make as a debate. Let's take the example of social media being bad. Social media being bad alone isn't a claim, because it's way too vague and it's simply just a statement. Though if I add on the following, social media is bad for middle schoolers because it ruins their attention span, that would be a better claim, because it's direct and it's actually making a very good point that's specific, rather than giving vague details without any explanation as to why social media is bad. Your claim should have some sort of reasoning. It doesn't necessarily need evidence, but it needs some sort of logic behind it that's embedded into it that makes it really strong. The second letter of Peel is E, and this first E stands for evidence. Evidence is simply proof that your point is true in the form of facts. Your evidence could be a statistic, a documented study, a research initiative, etc. There's many different types of evidence, and not necessarily all of them have to be online. You could even take some evidence from books, for example. Good evidence should be specific, recent, and credible. It should be relevant to your point and topic, and it should also be highly credible by checking the author's qualifications and making sure that the site that you take it from is actually credible as well. Strong evidence might sound something like this. According to a 2023 study by the American Psychological Association, teens who spend more than 4 hours on social media often suffer from severe symptoms of depression and anxiety, especially when compared to those who didn't spend more than 4 hours on social media. Also, when it comes to evidence, it's important to note these 2 key things. The first thing is that you should always prioritize quality over quantity. It doesn't matter if you have a bajillion pieces of evidence in a debate round, but it matters if you have one piece of evidence that's so good that your opponents can't even refute it and your judge has to acknowledge it. That one piece of evidence is going to be better than 1,000 other pieces of evidence that carry no weight and are uncredible and aren't recent at all. The other thing is that you don't need to memorize your evidence. You don't necessarily need to know where it's from or necessarily need to know who wrote it. You just need to know the brief idea of what it says or what it's supporting, so that way you can actually use it for your arguments and use it for your points in your debate round. The third letter of Peel is E, and this is the second E, which represents explain. This step is one of the most commonly made mistakes, even by professional debaters. People often forget that they have to connect the dots. You can't just bring up a piece of evidence, as I stated earlier, without explaining why it matters. Those two go hand in hand, and that's why they're so important for each other. You have to explain, you have to give reasoning and logic as to why your point is true. You can't just state a statistic and expect your judge or your opponents to connect the dots for you. You have to give those explanations and reasonings yourself, so that way your opponents and judges are able to follow along better for your argument, and so that way your point comes across clear rather than being misconstrued by somebody else. A simple explanation could be something like middle schoolers suffer more from anxiety and depression because they are in their developing stages of their life, which makes them more susceptible to different symptoms of anxiety and depression, especially when they're introduced to it by something they use actively, such as social media. The fourth and final letter of Peel is L, which stands for link. Link simply means to put your argument in context, or really fit the bigger picture. Understand why this minor detail really plays a bigger role in the overall debate, and understand why this simple argument is actually what wins you a round rather than just winning you a point. Now, it's important we make a distinction here. Explaining and linking are two completely different things. In this scenario, explaining is meant to represent what your argument is, and it's supposed to help you understand how to better describe your argument. Whereas linking is completely different. Linking is putting your argument in the bigger picture, understanding why this argument wins you the entire round out of all the other arguments you have been making. One example you could use for this is a closing statement. You could say something along the lines of, since social media is constantly harming teenagers' minds, we should therefore limit social media usage in order to protect our minds and in order to prevent symptoms of anxiety and depression from creeping on us. And that's literally it. There's nothing else you need to build an argument. Now, of course, there are more complex arguments and different ways that you could build these complex arguments. But for our purposes, the simplest way is to use the Peel method that I've recommended for you. Just remember, point, evidence, explain, and link. If you remember those four simple things, you can build almost any argument, or at least the foundations for any argument. And that's really all it takes. You just have to follow these steps in order and make sure that you are going through common mistakes that you might find and ensuring that you have avoided them, and ensuring if you do have them that you clear yourself of them and actually fix and take the time to perfect your argument. Now, fair warning, since this is most likely one of your first times making an argument, it will also be important to make sure that you don't be too hard on yourself if you don't get it right the first time. It does take time to understand how to properly build an argument, but it is much easier to understand now that you know the exact steps to follow, and much easier to correct and grow and get better at since you know exactly what you need to do and you have a better idea of what you can improve on. But yeah, that's it for now. Make sure to like and subscribe for more educational videos to help you with your debate and speaking skills, and I'll see you very soon. Peace.